The 1960s were the golden age of spy movies. Few people did more for the genre than Alfred Hitchcock. He is usually remembered for his thrillers and mysteries, but it was Hitchcock who proved with The Man Who Knew Too Much and North by Northwest that spy movies could make serious money at the box office. And that is how Agent 007 arrived in theaters. The Bond franchise is one of the highest-grossing series in movie history. Across 25 films, it has never had a single box office flop. Even the strange and questionable entries, the ones that got Bond's face hastily replaced afterward, did not actually flop. They simply fell short of expectations. The producers had to switch from a luxury yacht to a motorboat, and not everyone was happy about that. Even the Bond movies that are not part of the official universe did not flop. The ones made because of legal disputes, and even the ones Steven Seagal had a hand in, still made huge money in theaters. Just imagine if the courts had allowed not one movie but several. We could have had parallel, unconnected Bond franchises that would all still be raking it in. Its own comic book universe, except instead of a crowd of superheroes in colorful spandex, there is just one guy named James Bond. And he is everywhere, just with different faces. You can test the popularity of the Bond series with inflation. For example, the 60s movies Goldfinger and Thunderball would pull in around $1 billion today, roughly the same as Skyfall. In 60 years, the popularity of the series has not dropped, and even without adjusting for inflation, the total box office of the series has flown past $5 billion. So it is time to look back at the most successful spy movie series of all time. Spy is a generous word here because once every street kid knows a spy's face, he stops being a spy. But in the movies, you can keep spying even when everyone knows you are a spy. And if you judge the demand for spies by box office numbers, there has simply never been a better spy than Bond. Ian Fleming decided to write something about spies and intelligence officers back during World War II. He was working in British intelligence at the time, so he figured his experience would rub off on the books and make them very realistic. The first novel the writer sat down to work on was Casino Royale. It turned out so brilliantly that all his friends suggested throwing the masterpiece away and never trying to publish it, or at least using a pen name so that after the release the shadow of shame would fall on some John Smith instead of Ian Fleming. Every publisher and every fellow writer Fleming showed the novel to also tried to close their eyes and pretend they had never seen it. But connections did the trick. Or nepotism, if you prefer. Fleming came from a wealthy family, many of his relatives moved in publishing circles, and his own brother got the novel placed with a small publishing house. That is where it came out in 1953. It was such a success that they had to run several extra printings to keep up with demand. The critics, everyone's favorite people, also gave Bond a big boost. Many respected professionals called Fleming's books trash and called James Bond a masochistic farm boy with some kind of problem with women. The novel Dr. No got hit especially hard. It was supposedly the creative rock bottom of a man with a failing marriage. By 1961, the buzz around the women problems and the creative collapse had driven demand for the book so high that producers started circling the writer and demanding the movie rights. And in 1962, Dr. No happened. Sean Connery became James Bond largely because nobody wanted him. The producers planned to make several Bond movies and could not come to terms with any talented actors. They all either asked for too much money or refused to sign on for multiple films, suggesting everyone wait and see whether the first one succeeded or failed. Sean Connery was not exactly buried in work, so he did not have much of a choice. Connery himself said he was worried about the contract. He understood he was signing up for what was basically a feature-length TV series, and that could seriously damage his career, since his chances to act anywhere else while the series was running would be limited. But after looking out the window of his house and not spotting a line of producers outside, he agreed to the role anyway. Albert Broccoli said much later that they were not expecting any huge success from Bond. The film got a whole $1 million, a decent budget for those years. Adjusted for inflation, that would be around 10 to 15 million today, and if you factor in everything else that has changed since the early 60s, closer to 50, although nobody can really calculate it precisely anyway. In short, Broccoli and the other producers were simply counting on a modest hit. 5 million would have been enough. With television sales on top, that would have been a very respectable sum for the time. Dr. No made more than $60 million in theaters. The movie also noticeably changed Bond in the books. Fleming liked the humor Sean Connery gave the character so much that in the novels published after the first movie, the title character started cracking jokes too. For his first Bond, Sean Connery got about $20,000. Actually, even less. Connery said the $20,000 to $30,000 included various bonuses paid out once it became clear they had a hit. That fee looks laughable now, but in the early 60s, money was a little different. Thanks to a well-written contract that anticipated success, just not success on that scale, the actor managed to earn 10 times more for the sequel. They rushed into shooting From Russia with Love while Dr. No was still in theaters and showing no signs of slowing down. The sequel got $2 million, and Connery earned around $250,000. Ian Fleming called From Russia with Love his favorite Bond novel. Sean Connery also usually named From Russia with Love and Thunderball among his favorite Bond projects, although he always stressed that he never took Bond seriously and always saw the series as a comedy, which is why he preferred the least serious entries. This movie is famous for gifting helicopters to half the British films of that era. The filmmakers shot so much helicopter footage that they could not fit it all into the final movie, so they sold the leftovers off to poorer productions. At the box office, the film made $79 million on a $2 million budget. The third Bond film, Goldfinger, also went into production, while From Russia with Love was still playing. Connery earned $500,000 for Goldfinger, and the film became the first in the series to fly past $100 million. Goldfinger cost $3 million and collected $125 million. And it was Goldfinger that kicked off product placement in the Bond franchise. The success was so wild that all the suits, watches, and cars the filmmakers used to have to buy started arriving completely free of charge from the very next film. And one film after that, companies started paying for the privilege. These days, Bond movies are considered the most heavily sponsored productions in the business. In some entries, the paid advertising is worth more than $100 million, which means a good chunk of the budget pays for itself before the movie even opens. The cost of the hidden advertising in the 60s films is unknown, of course, but it is known that Aston Martin regularly outbid other car companies in the battle for Bond. Thunderball came out right on schedule a year after Goldfinger, in 1965. The film cost a massive $9 million for the time and made $142 million in theaters. And this is where Sean Connery first started packing his bags. His contract covered 4 films, and he began telling the producers he was tired and wanted out. All of this dragged out production of the next Bond. In the end, the departing Sean negotiated a fee of $750,000 plus 25% of the film's profits. Not the box office gross, but a percentage of what the studio actually earned. You Only Live Twice came out in 1967. It cost $9 million and made $111 million in theaters, of which the studio could keep 50 to 60%. Although things were a bit more complicated back then, and the standard rates of today might not apply. But whatever the studio received, Connery took his cut of it, which is exactly why the actor drove off before the 6th Bond film. The box office dipped, and Connery was getting way too greedy. His exit is usually explained by new challenges, exhaustion, and a conflict with producer Albert Broccoli that supposedly had nothing to do with money. All of that is possible, but it is a little hard to believe money played no part, especially once you know what happened next. Alongside You Only Live, twice another Bond movie came out, Casino Royale. This film is not part of the official Bond universe. It exists because of Ian Fleming, who back in the 50s sold the movie rights to Casino Royale for $6,000. Later, there were attempts to make a deal with the rights holders and shoot an official Casino Royale with Sean Connery, but money disputes got in the way as usual. They could not agree on how to split the future profits. So the rights holders decided to make their own Bond movie and even approached Sean Connery. He asked for $1 million, and their interest in Sean instantly evaporated. The project went through a dozen different screenwriters. It gradually slid from a spy thriller into a parody of spy thrillers. Even Woody Allen worked on the script. In the end, the movie did get made. Instead of the planned $5 to $6 million, it cost $12, more than any Connery Bond film of that era. It made $42 million in theaters, less than the official series, but if the makers had owned the rights to the other books, they clearly would have kept going. Meanwhile, the official Bond, having lost Connery, went looking for someone to replace the Scotsman. The top candidate was Roger Moore, but the negotiations dragged on, and Moore chose the TV series The Saint instead. He was already starring in the show and re-signed his contract because he could not afford to wait. So the new Bond ended up being George Lazenby. In 1966, he was named Model of the Year. Producer Albert Broccoli spotted him in a commercial and sent him an invitation to audition. Legend has it that when Lazenby met the producers, he told them so many fantastic stories about his talents that they believed him instantly and signed him on the spot. Lazenby's main piece of fiction was his tales about the acting schools he had been conquering since childhood. As it turned out later, Lazenby simply could not act, and all of that got dumped on Peter Hunt, the director of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Quickly realizing he had been handed a model instead of an actor, Hunt turned the set into a living hell for Lazenby. Later, Lazenby would explain his exit from the franchise by pointing to that hell on set and to his agent's advice to drop the whole thing and conquer the movie business through other roles. The movie made $82 million in theaters on a $7 million budget. Less than the Connery films, but still an excellent box office. Yet according to all available information and various interviews, Lazenby left on his own. He said his agent kept insisting that Bond was finished and that he would simply bury his career by appearing in movies like that. All he had to do was turn down the role, and fame would find him immediately. This was not entirely out of nowhere. On Her Majesty's Secret Service got savaged by the press. Audiences were unhappy too, and Lazenby took most of the beating. Far too many people noticed he was not an actor. So Lazenby said no to the producers who were offering him the next Bond film and walked away. 5 years later, he was working for scraps in bit parts, and by the late 70s, he was placing newspaper ads offering his services as an actor for a bag of chips. Later, things improved a little, if you can call it that. He appeared in a few well-known TV shows and landed one of the lead roles in the Emmanuel film series. He also showed up in the movie Twin Sitters. So if George really did make that decision himself, you can only applaud the man. Lazenby's refusal came out of nowhere. The script for the next film was already finished. Advertising contracts were burning, so the producers ran straight back to Sean Connery. They threw a fee of $1.25 million at him, plus a promise of 12% of the box office on a first dollar basis, meaning Sean got paid first and everyone else after. On top of that, the studio United Artists committed to financing any 2 future Sean Connery films of his choosing. He did not know which ones yet, but promised to pick soon. In the end, only one got made. It flopped instantly, and the studio offered Sean a bit of money to forget the whole arrangement. Diamonds Are Forever came out in 1971 and made $116 million on an $8 million budget. After that, the producers spent months circling Connery, begging him to star in one more film, the absolute last one, they swore. But Sean Connery said no, and this is when, for the only time in Bond history, an American Bond almost happened. The lead role was offered to Steve McQueen and Burt Reynolds. United Artists insisted on it. Bond films made far more money worldwide than in the United States, and the studio figured the problem was the English actors who spoke English badly. Casting McQueen or Reynolds was supposed to fix that and open the money floodgates. McQueen turned it down immediately because of his schedule. Burt Reynolds actually thought the offer over for a while, but eventually said no too. Later in interviews, he said he had decided that Bond had to be an Englishman, even one who talks funny. After that, the producers approached the Welshman Anthony Hopkins, but he also declined, saying he had no desire to appear in that kind of nonsense. When everyone said no, producer Albert Broccoli quickly signed Roger Moore, freshly free of his TV show, the man he had wanted as Bond all along. Moore had wanted to play Bond back in the Dr. No days. He was equally unwanted at that time and came in to audition, but lost to Sean Connery. At 34, he was considered too young for a respectable agent. At 46, though, he was exactly what they needed. Live and Let Die was shot on the cheap, which is why some scenes never got filmed at all. In the more dangerous locations, the crew had to pay off local gangs so that other gangs would not rob them. And money was tight. When it ran out, they had to pack up and run, because at that point, every gang in the area wanted to rob them. The film hit theaters in 1973. It cost $7 million and made somewhere between $134 and $162 million. Either way, the box office was second only to Thunderball. Roger Moore was declared the savior, and for his very next Bond film, he was paid $1 million. The Man with the Golden Gun arrived in theaters in 1974. It got $13 million. And this is where the producers started thinking about replacing Roger Moore. The box office dropped hard. The new Bond made $97 million. Among the recent Bond films, it only managed to beat George Lazenby. Money got very tight, and the producers started turning on each other. As it happened, one of the two owners of the Bond franchise, Harry Saltzman, was going through a rough stretch. All his side projects around Bond had failed, and with the Bond box office sinking, he risked losing his shirt. As a result of his conflict with Albert Broccoli, who was doing better, Harry had to part with his share of the franchise. He sold his 50% in 1975 for just $20 million. While the producers were at war, the script for the new Bond film was rewritten several times, and several directors walked away from the project. Steven Spielberg really wanted to direct the new movie. He kept calling the producers and offering them the services of a talented filmmaker. But Albert Broccoli turned him down. This was 1975. Spielberg's Jaws had not come out yet. At that point, he was the director of some Columbo episodes and of the Sugarland Express, which made a decent $13 million on a $3 million budget, but gave Spielberg no name recognition whatsoever. So Broccoli had no idea what talents the man was talking about. Anyway, The Spy Who Loved Me reached theaters only in 1977. And this time, everything went great. The $14 million film made $185 million, the best result in franchise history not counting inflation. Since Star Wars was blowing up the box office right next door, the filmmakers decided to immediately send Bond into space. Roger Moore flew there in 1979. The attempt to copy Star Wars cost the studio $34 million, but the movie delivered. Moonraker became the first Bond film to clear $200 million. It made $212. Roger Moore was paid $4 million for that one. For Your Eyes Only in 1981 cost $28 million and made $195. Octopussy in 1983 cost $27 million and took $183 at the box office. Many believe the film could have made more, but in 1983, two Bond movies rolled into theaters at once, and one of them was a new Bond with Sean Connery. Never Say Never Again also happened because of Ian Fleming. In the early 60s, he had worked with screenwriter Kevin McClory on one of the planned Bond films. The movie never happened because of the enormous budget it required, and everyone abandoned the story. Everyone except Ian Fleming. He hauled ideas from the abandoned script into the novel Thunderball, but forgot to credit McClory as a co-author. And Kevin McClory noticed what followed were years of legal battles that eventually produced the film Never Say Never Again. McClory won, and he was allowed to rent Bond for one movie. Sean Connery, whose career at the time was plummeting into the abyss, agreed to become Bond again for $5 million. The title is a direct nod to his declarations that he would never play Bond again in his life. And on the set of this movie, Sean Connery got acquainted with the legendary handshake of Steven Seagal. Seagal was not an actor back then and worked as a consultant on film sets. He taught Sean Connery how to properly strike the neck and break a villain's arm. And to make sure Sean really got the idea, one training day, he went ahead and broke Sean's arm. Sean said a very pleased Steven walked up to him one day and offered to show him a trick. The trick worked beautifully. Connery did say the story got heavily embellished over time. No bones were sticking out and nobody tore his arm off, but he did get a couple of fractures and had to wear a cast for a while. The film made $161 million in theaters on a $34 million budget, also a very good result. and its makers likewise believe they lost part of the box office to Octopussy, which came out first. Roger Moore did not want to star in A View to a Kill, but $5 million changed his mind. Except the box office of A View to a Kill dipped again, this time to $152 million on a $30 million budget. Moore refused to star in the next film, too. He probably would have agreed for $5 to $7 million, but with the box office falling, the producers were simply afraid to raise his fee. So, A View to a Kill became Roger Moore's last Bond. He was already 59. Broccoli would later say he could have talked Moore into one more film, but Moore begged to be released, and the producer chose not to resort to violence, agreeing that 60 was quite enough. The next Bond was Pierce Brosnan. Yes, he was picked as Bond back in 1987. Except Pierce was starring in a TV series that had just been canceled, and he signed on for Bond. Then, riding the wave of headlines about the new Bond, the still-airing season of the series suddenly started pulling great ratings, and the network changed its mind about canceling it. And since Pierce had contractual obligations, he was forced to return to the freshly resurrected show. Funny enough, when Pierce Brosnan stopped being Bond and the newspapers switched to Timothy Dalton, the show's ratings collapsed again, and the studio did not even finish the new season. They delivered 6 episodes instead of the planned 22, and Pierce Brosnan simply ended up on the street with no show and no Bond. At least he could be a little happy for Timothy Dalton. In theory, Mel Gibson could have become Bond. In those years, he passed for an Australian. But the producers quickly figured out he was a fake and dropped the idea of signing him, even though the interest in him was confirmed officially. Sam Neill was also considered. In the end, they settled on Timothy Dalton. Dalton signed for 3 Bond films. The Living Daylights arrived in theaters in 1987 and made $191 million worldwide on a $40 million budget. A good result? Dalton's second Bond film, License to Kill, came out in 1989. It did worse. On a $36 million budget, it made $155. But that was still a fine result, so nobody planned to replace Timothy. Then, the planets misaligned. The studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer started going bankrupt and got passed from hand to hand. Because of that, development of the new film, planned for 1991, ground to a halt. Dalton said that in 1990 everything was fine, the script was ready, and talks were underway with several directors. And at that exact moment, a major deal to buy the studio fell through. A new buyer appeared quickly, but the studio sold for $1.2 billion. And in 1992, the new owner, Giancarlo Peretti, who had merged Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer with the studio Pathé, started going bankrupt himself. So Bond production stalled again. Dalton's contract covered 3 films or 7 years, and in 1993, those 7 years ran out. He was offered a new 4-film deal, but worried about all the poor people going bankrupt in droves around Bond. Timothy turned the new contract down. He insisted he was not sure the new deal would not hurt his career, and he had no idea how much longer he would have to wait. Which is how, in 1994, Bond got a new old face. Pierce Brosnan. He agreed to a 4-film contract. Before him, though, the role was turned down by Liam Neeson, who apparently already suspected something and feared that Bond would get in the way of his future career as Hollywood's favorite retirement-age action hero. GoldenEye broke the records for advertising deals. A 3-film agreement was signed with BMW, and Pepsi, IBM, Omega, and a crowd of smaller brands paid big money to get into the movie. Back then, all of it was valued at $20 to $30 million. GoldenEye itself cost $60 million, meaning in theory half the budget was recouped through product placement before the movie even opened. In theaters, GoldenEye made $356 million. Not counting inflation, it was the highest-grossing Bond film ever. Tomorrow Never Dies was delivered in 1997. The film cost $110 million and made $334. Pierce Brosnan's contract had an escalator built in. For every new Bond film, he got $4 million more. If GoldenEye paid him $4 million, Tomorrow Never Dies paid $8. And for his third film, The World Is Not Enough, released in 1999, Brosnan already got $12 million. That one did slightly better, collecting $362 million on a $135 million budget. This may not look like huge profit, but remember the product placement. The films actually cost the studio less, and home video and television piled many millions on top later. For Die Another Day in 2002, Brosnan was paid $16 million. The film cost $142 million and made $432 in theaters, once again setting the franchise box office record. The studio spent a long time mulling over a fifth Bond film with Pierce Brosnan in the lead. The main problem was precisely his fee. Between various obligations and the need for a new contract, Brosnan stood to earn around $30 million on a fifth film. And at first, the fifth film was in fact being built around Brosnan. It was called Casino Royale, with Martin Campbell attached to direct, the same man who made GoldenEye. In 2004, Brosnan lost the role of Bond. He says he never turned it down. One day, they simply called him and wished him a pleasant journey. He was shooting the movie After the Sunset at the time and was in mild shock, convinced he had simply been thrown out on the street because there had been no warning signs. All the producers kept bouncing around him with joy, telling him what a wonderful Bond he was. Die Another Day had brought in so much money that each of them bought 3 yachts and 4 mansions. And suddenly he gets a phone call saying he is fired. He called it the biggest disappointment of his life, learning that in Hollywood you cannot trust anyone, not even the people you consider friends. But there is another version, the one about the astronomical fee the actor demanded, confident he could afford to. Brosnan asked for $25 million. Sometimes the press mentions 30. Daniel Craig starred in Casino Royale for $3 million. A crowd of actors went through the casting process. For a while, the frontrunner was considered to be Michael Fassbender. But then the producers decided that setting a course for a box office flop before shooting even started was not their style, and switched to Christian Bale. He turned the role down immediately. The producers also poked at Doug Ray Scott and Henry Cavill. Director Martin Campbell actually liked Cavill. He said the producers were fine with him too, but everyone agreed that 22 was just too young. After that, they briefly poked at Ewan McGregor and finally settled on Daniel Craig. The thinking goes that the producers wanted a dramatic contrast with Brosnan, a tractor driver instead of an aristocratic gentleman, a bit of freshness, in other words. Daniel Craig turned down the studio's first offer to play James Bond. The actor felt that Bond had turned into a faceless theme park ride, and he had no desire to star in something like that. He changed his mind after being offered a look at the Casino Royale script. Maybe the $3 million played its part too. It is not Brosnan's $30 million, but it is not bad either. The Casino Royale that was supposed to be Pierce Brosnan's film and the one we ended up seeing are somewhat different movies. The first script was rewritten several times. A more grounded movie, without laser cannons and villains who can leap into jet engines mid-flight, was planned for Pierce Brosnan too. But once Pierce was thrown out on the street, the script got grounded even further. The Jason Bourne films served as the benchmark. The Casino Royale producers also drastically cut the advertising in the film. The last Brosnan picture, Die Another Day, had been savagely criticized for the sheer amount of advertising on screen. Reviews of the time often called the movie Buy Another Day, playing on the original title. So if Die Another Day was considered the top ad earner at release, Casino Royale is considered one of the poorest in that department. There is advertising in it, of course, but if Brosnan's film made 60 or 80 million on ads, and some write 100, Casino Royale made maybe 10 or 20. Ditching the fantasy and turning Bond into Bourne paid off. Casino Royale made $606 million on a $150 million budget, setting new franchise records for both budget and box office. After such a big theatrical success, the studio immediately greenlit a sequel and handed it an even bigger budget. But the movie did worse in theaters and is still considered the weakest film of the Daniel Craig era. Craig said the original Quantum of Solace script was not a direct continuation of Casino Royale, but they got caught in the writer's strike and had to improvise. The script was not ready and nobody was going to cancel the shoot, so they invented the script over the course of the entire production. According to Craig, the title Quantum of Solace was slapped onto the film just because. It did not fit the script they had at all, but it was decided that Bond titles are often meaningless anyway, and Quantum of Solace sounds intriguing. When the script morphed into a different script during filming, the title stopped being quite so meaningless. Craig was left deeply unhappy with the production. He declared it an interesting experience, but swore he would never again agree to star in a movie without a finished script. Though he admitted he was amazed they managed to assemble something that more or less resembles a movie. At release, Quantum of Solace was the most expensive Bond film ever made. It cost $200 million. And sometimes the figure 230 comes up. It made 586. Skyfall took longer, once again, because the studio was going bankrupt. For Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, bankruptcy had been a cherished tradition since the 80s. Skyfall reached theaters in 2012, but the 4-year break and a smart marketing campaign built around the 50th anniversary of the franchise worked beautifully. The $180 million film made $1.1 billion worldwide, which is roughly what Sean Connery's Thunderball would have made in those years adjusted for inflation. Spectre was delivered in 2015. It could no longer match Skyfall. It made $881 million on a $245 million budget. No Time to Die came out only 6 years later. It was supposed to be 4, but first came reshoots, then COVID, which pushed the premiere back a year and a half. That is how the record gap between Bond films, the one from 1989 to 1995, got repeated. Those delays forced the studio into yet another round of reshoots. The advertising deals demanded it. With the film delayed by almost 3 years, all the advertising contracts expired. The new cars featured in the film, the ones whose screen time had been paid for, were no longer new 3 years later. Same story with the watches, the electronics, and all the other fashionable toys the film was supposed to advertise. Everything had to be reshot, which is how the original $250 million budget ballooned to $348. No Time to Die became the most expensive Bond film ever. Except you cannot see that budget on screen because the movie was simply filmed twice. With that budget, it made only $771 million. That was in 2021, with various COVID restrictions still in place. But the filmmakers could not wait. They would have had to reshoot the movie yet again, since much of the reshot material would have gone stale by then. In short, product placement is great, but not always. The makers of the Bond franchise probably suffered from the dark side of product placement more than anyone. And since 2021, we have had no Bond. Daniel Craig ended his career as a secret agent. 5 years have passed since his retirement, and we still do not even have the name of the new James Bond. There are rumors about a couple of actors, but they may well remain rumors. The delays are usually blamed on the conflict between Barbara Broccoli and the leadership of Amazon, which now owns Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Amazon wanted even more freshness in Bond, plus a whole universe with TV shows, sequels, prequels, and other spin-offs. Barbara Broccoli, who is Albert Broccoli's daughter, wanted none of that and insisted on standalone Bond films with no shows and no turning Bond into a woman. Those are Broccoli's own words, not rumors. However, about a year ago, she was finally pushed aside. Or, more precisely, they threw so many bags of money at her that she stepped away and handed full creative control of Bond over to Amazon, since previously she had the final say on everything. Absolutely insane figures were floated, up to $1 billion flying her way. But the billion was denied by various insiders who insisted the real number was much lower. How much lower they did not specify. Denis Villeneuve has been officially named the director of the new Bond film. Right now, Villeneuve is working on the third Dune. It comes out at the end of the year, and after that he will move on to Bond. Most likely the signature droning score will roll into Bond along with Villeneuve. That is happy news. Any movie with the droning instantly becomes better than a movie without the droning. Everything else is up in the air. The rumors about the new script are too varied and too vague, as such rumors always are, but it is already obvious that we are in for a record gap between Bond films. The movie cannot possibly come out in 2027, since filming will not even start this year. That means 2028 at the earliest. 7 years. In the grand scheme of things, that is not much, but for Bond, it is an eternity. In the 60-year history of the franchise, 6-year gaps have happened only twice. Now it will be 7 years, or even 8. But we can hope this break will produce a great movie. Although, according to those same rumors, the script is still not even 50% done, because Amazon does not know where to take Bond. And even inside the company, there are arguments about the shows and spin-offs that some people want and others do not. We will find out about all of that some other time. And while the Bond franchise heads into the longest intermission of its life, we are left with 25 films, 6 very different Bonds, and 60 years of proof that you can sell audiences the same man in a tuxedo forever as long as you swap his face in time. So set the martini aside for now. We will have it shaken, not stirred, once Villeneuve wraps up. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.